Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
We talk to Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business on the program every week. He is a man who knows more about issues surrounding migration, the housing market, and the way we're coping with this more than anyone. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Clinton. How are you?
I'm good, mate. The government yesterday was trying to have a go at the coalition, claiming that between Angus Taylor and Peter Dutton, they're tying themselves in knots. They're confused about what their policy is on how much they're going to reduce migration from. But it's pretty clear that the coalition is going to go to the election with a promise to dramatically cut migration to lower numbers than Labor.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank goodness for that. That's all I can say. Look, what I call this is it's called FUD. That stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So basically, Peter Dutton came out last week in his budget reply speech and said that he's going to cut the permanent migrant intake from a planned level of 185,000 this financial year to 140,000 for the next 2 years, 150,000 year three, and 160,000 year four. Now, we're not talking about massive cuts here. We're talking about still historically high cuts. So basically, all that would happen under Peter Dutton is that Australia's permanent migrant intake would go back to basically what it was in 2006 near the end of the Howard government, and that is still a historically high level. So just to put that into context, in the 60 years post-World War II, before this, the so-called Big Australia policy came into effect in 2005, it started in 2005, Australia's net overseas migration averaged 90,000 a year, and it was basically 90,000 in a very narrow band. So it didn't go up much. It was just sort of 90,000 steady as you go for about 60 years. And then from 2005, the federal government started lifting it and then ramped it completely up. And then we got to 220,000 average in the 15 years leading to the pandemic. Then obviously this massive explosion. Now, Peter Dutton is still going to run a very strong migration program under this. It's just going to be a little bit less than what we've had in the last sort of 15 years. And, it's sensible policy. And I will also add that there was his migration policy is not perfect. It's obviously a massive improvement on what Labor's proposing, but there were some weird things in his speech. So, for example, Peter Dutton perversely promised to increase international student work hours to 30 hours a week. Now, that's a stupid policy, I've got to say. I've got to be quite frank. So, before the pandemic hit, international students were allowed to work 20 hours a week. It got relaxed to unlimited work hours briefly over the pandemic, and Labor has now implemented 24 hours a week, which is 4 hours more than we had pre-pandemic. And what Peter Dutton has proposed to do is basically lift that to 30 hours a week. And what it's basically going to do is it's going to have the effect of encouraging more non-genuine students to Australia for work, because obviously they can work more hours. So I think that's a bit of a silly policy. But to cut a long story short, he's effectively offered up slightly lower migration, still very strong by historical standards. And all we've seen is basically the leftist media, pro-migration think tanks, the business lobby, the higher education lobby, the property lobby, Labor, and everyone else slam these cuts as if they're going to decimate the economy. It's going to decimate business. It's going to lead to skills shortages. It's going to destroy the federal budget. It's going to endanger international education exports. It's just absolutely laughable. And meanwhile, Australians. We had an opinion poll that came out over the weekend by Resolve, and it showed that 2/3 of Australians believe the current record migration levels are too high, and 50% also believe that next year's proposed migration of 260,000 are too high. So that opinion poll by Resolve pretty much conforms with nearly every single opinion poll that was undertaken pre-pandemic and since the pandemic, which shows that Australians don't support this big migration program. And the best thing to come out of Dutton's modest migration cuts is that finally, the tripartite consensus in Big Australia between Labor, Liberal and the Greens has been somewhat broken. And finally, we've got immigration at the centre of public debate, and I think that's a fantastic thing, and it's about time.
Yesterday, you just touched on it there. Yesterday, there were two of the leading business groups came out and questioned the policy, said that they're fearful that business is going to be left short of skilled workers. Do you think that's a fair criticism from those business groups?
Oh, absolutely not. It's a ridiculous criticism. I'll tell you why. Because we've had, as I've said, 20 years of extreme immigration, right? So immigration was ramped up massively from the mid-2000s. And over that time, since the turn of the century, Australia's population has grown by 8.2 million people. So we've had this mass immigration for 20-odd years. We've grown by 8.2 million people, which is an extraordinary number, and yet we've got worse skills shortages than ever. And all that tells you is that running a big migration policy does not solve skills shortages. So what we've effectively done is we've run this disjointed whack-a-mole migration system whereby we try and, solve a problem in one area and we effectively create problems in other areas. So, for example, we could say, okay, we've got a building shortage at the moment, we've got a housing shortage. We need to import 1 million builders into the country. And you go, okay, well, that'll solve the labour shortage in building. The problem with it is it then creates labour shortages in every other area of the economy, because suddenly you have a shortage of nurses, you have a shortage of teachers, you have a shortage of everything else. So then the solution is, okay, we'll import those people. And you keep going through that process, and then you end up with a shortage of builders again because everything else has increased. And that's effectively the migration program that we've run for 20 years.
I spoke to Abul Rizvi, who's former deputy head of the Immigration Department yesterday on the program. There were some figures that were released this week that showed there are 80,000 effectively failed asylum seekers still in the country, and a lot of them, there are 60,000 of them actually working, and a lot of them have just disappeared into the workforce, that they can't be tracked down. They're people who've overstayed tourist visas and overstayed student visas.
Yeah, and that's actually been a problem for a long time. So, for example, people come over on tourist visas from Malaysia and places like that, and then they end up, as soon as they get in, they basically try and claim asylum. They then get bogged down with the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, which can take years to resolve. And then they can stay in the country on a bridging visa. And it's one of the reasons why bridging visa numbers have just gone through the roof. They went through the roof under the previous government. They went through the roof over the pandemic. And they're still, very high. So, look, it's a problem. And one of the things that's happened recently, and I'm not sure if Rizvi talked about it, but the federal government's trying to crack down on student visas. And so they've started issuing less student visas. But then suddenly bridging visas have risen.
Yeah,
and,
yes.
And we actually think, when you join the dots, a lot of the students that now can't get their student visas renewed are now in the country, and now they're just going on the bridging visas. So, it's a diabolical migration system we've run for a long time, and the whole notion that it's going to destroy business is just laughable when we've had literally 8.2 million population growth this century driven by migration, and yet we've got worse skills shortages than ever, I'd argue.
Just lastly, do you think this will be a vote winner for the coalition? I mean, Labor's trying to claim that they don't know what the true facts are, but do you think this will actually resonate with the public?
Yeah, I definitely will. I mean, every opinion poll, pre-pandemic, for years pre-pandemic, since the pandemic, this year, have showed that, Australians don't support this big migration policy. And, I think definitely it'll resonate. Whether it'll be enough to get the coalition elected could be hard. I mean, obviously it's always hard to dislodge a government after one term. And I'd also argue that, Peter Dutton is not the most charismatic guy, I guess, and he's not the most likeable guy in the public's eyes. What I would have loved to have seen is to get a new leader in, someone who's fresh, who's not bogged down by the previous government, because Peter Dutton's obviously lumped in with the, Morrison government, etc. Someone fresh who doesn't have the baggage to then implement a policy like this. I think it would have been great.
I reckon he's actually cutting through, though, because I think a lot of new opposition leaders, when after a long-term government is thrown out, the opposition leader's a placeholder until they come up with someone who actually is going to be the Prime Minister or a leader of a state, a Premier. Where I think Dutton's actually surprised a lot of people by actually showing, well, he's got a lot of strength and actually sticking it out. Yeah,
that's true. And look, I must admit, my success in predicting these things has been pretty poor. I remember years ago I thought the same about Tony Abbott, and then he became Prime Minister. I thought the same about Albo. When Albo became opposition leader, I remember saying to my business partner Dave, I said, he's just another Simon Crean. And then now he's Prime Minister. So, it does show what I know, which is not a lot, but certainly on this issue, I mean, he's given himself the best shot, because
100%.
Finally the big Australia consensus has been somewhat broken down. I mean, obviously it's still big Australia, it's just not as big Australia. They'll still see Australia's population grow too fast, etc. And, from a historical perspective, but gee, I tell you what, it's a hell of a lot better than what Labor's offering.
Always good to talk to you, mate. We'll catch up next week.
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Osselin from Macro Business.